I see people are still connecting with audio though. Let's give just a second for the system to catch up.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Melissa Sadorf. I am the superintendent of the Stanfield Elementary School District in Pinal County, and I'm also the Arizona Rural Schools Association president-elect. I appreciate you spending some time with us this morning for our Superintendent's Roundtable for September. It should be a very good hour full of useful information for you, and I would like to have my co-host introduce himself.
Good morning. My name is Sean Rickert. I'm the superintendent of the Pima Unified School District, member of the ARSA Executive Board, and the advocacy coordinator for the association. I'm glad to have the opportunity to meet with you. I think we've definitely set a record for participants on this month's webinar. So I guess we did a good job of picking a topic. And so I'm gonna share a little bit of information about Proposition 208. And then we're going to turn it over to each of the four individuals that have been kind enough to join us to share some perspective. I hope you got a chance to look over their bios. You'll see that they're all individuals that have spent a lot of time familiarizing themselves with the needs of public education and public education funding in Arizona. And so we're really lucky to have their perspectives to kind of dwell on. And before I get into it, just by way of background, this topic kind of came about because I had a friend of mine, a superintendent from the other end of the state, the western end of the state, who called me up and said, gosh, my school board president is asking me about Proposition 208. He's a very conservative school board member. And yet he also very clearly understands the needs of public education for, the need for additional funding. And he's trying to figure out how to reconcile those two issues, the need for additional funding and the conservative rhetoric that he was hearing about Proposition 208. And the superintendent said, how can I get more information so that I can better answer his questions? And I said, well, we'll do that. That's what this roundtable was created for. Was to address those kinds of issues. So let me go ahead and
while you're doing that, Sean, I'm going to just get a few housekeeping things out of the way. Just keep in mind, please, that if you are not speaking, please ensure that you're muted so that we don't have feedback. We are recording this session. It'll be posted on the ARSA website at the end of today so that you're able to reference it and share it with your district membership as well. And then we are going to be going through our panelists. We have four gentlemen that have joined us today, and we're appreciative of them. But we're going to save question and answer until the end so that we have an opportunity to ensure that they all are able to lay out their information for you. So you can either at that time use the chat feature or you can unmute. And again, we, as always on these roundtables, want to make sure that we're having an interactive conversation with you as our members. So, Sean, back to you.
All right. I'm going to have to ask, I hate when people do this. Can you see my screen?
We can see that you've started sharing, but you have no slides up yet.
Okay.
Now you want to start going without the slides?
Just give me 1 second. Let me try this one more time.
Oh, we see stuff.
You see stuff?
We see a bunch of stuff.
See a bunch of stuff.
And Sean, this is fine. This is going on in about 900 classrooms right now as we're talking. Every educator is going through exactly this right now.
You're exactly right.
Fantastic.
All right. So what stuff are you seeing now?
November.
All right. Bam.
2020.
Okay. So here's the basics of Proposition 208, and this was gleaned from the Secretary of State's publication. I think every voter in Arizona got one of these things in their mailbox. What's on my ballot? And so that basically spells out the facts behind it. So to put it all in a nutshell, in spite of, the general avoidance of that. Basically, it does three things. It establishes the Student Support and Safety Fund. It establishes the Career and Workforce Program, and establishes an income tax surcharge for public education. So, those. So what does that mean? Student Support and Safety Fund is a fund that basically takes and divides funds out into five. So all of the revenue that comes in from this education tax, this surcharge, will be divided out into these five buckets. So 50% goes to provide money for teachers and classroom support personnel. 25% goes towards increasing base compensation and hiring additional student support services personnel. And then 10% goes to mentoring, 12% goes to the Career Training and Workforce Fund. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then 3% goes to the Arizona Teachers Academy Fund. So we have this division out of the monies. The Career Training and Workforce Program, like I said, is a new program, and there are a series of allowable uses, things that schools can use that for, ranging from voc ed through to college prep. It's not just focused on the voc ed end of things, although the naming of it might make it seem that way. Schools can use the money for AP classes, dual enrollment classes, the tuition for that, academic acceleration programs, school counselors, counseling, tutoring, a wide variety of services, and they can use it for 9th grade CTE, which we all know has been a deficit since we lost that funding a number of years ago. So where does the money come from? It comes from an income tax surcharge for public education. For single filers, you're talking about an additional 3.5% on all income over $250,000. For married filers, that's $500,000. It's projected to raise somewhere around $827 million. That's based on the current status quo. And in the comments on that estimate, JLBC said, well, given the uncertainty, our revenue estimate is speculative and subject to change. So don't start writing checks based on that estimate. Breakdown of the funds. What does that look like? So total 827 million divided out among 1.1 million pupils. You can see what that is per pupil. So of that, about $376 per pupil would go to teachers and classroom support. About $188 per pupil would go to support services. $90 per pupil would go towards the CTE program. $75.18 per pupil would go towards teacher retention, which includes mentoring. And then $22.55 per pupil would go towards the Teachers Academy. So it does provide some details. Like I said, I'm taking about 5-6 pages out of the Secretary of State's manual and condensing it down into a couple slides here. But one thing in the details, there are provisions prohibiting supplanting. We know how important that is. There are also definitions provided in there of classroom support personnel, mentoring retention programs, new classroom teachers, student support service personnel, and teachers themselves. So these are all carefully defined within the language of the proposition. It's all based on prior year enrollment. So it's similar to the Classroom Site Fund in that way. And it does not there's no exclusion from the legislative approval needed for spending beyond the constitutional level. And so in all likelihood, we know that has basically become a perennial requirement for education funding that we have to get approval from the legislature to spend beyond the constitutional limit that was put in place. So this would basically just add more money to ensure that that's something that has to happen every year. So those are the details as far as as far as it goes. So if you have any questions about that, if you wanted to post those in the chat, we can address those before, just kind of make sure everybody's on the same page as far as what the facts are before we kind of turn it over. Our panelists are very, very much, coming from differing perspectives. That's why we invited them. Joe Thomas has been an active advocate on behalf of teachers and teacher funding in his role with AEA. And so, we expect that he's going to have a different perspective from Chad in his role with small business. And that's expected. But before we get into those perspectives, does anybody have any questions just on what I've presented about the facts?
Yeah, this is Cliff Angle from Valentine.
Morning, Cliff.
I don't have a chat button to push for some reason. So my question is, you did the percentages off of the whole, and yet when I read it, it says that there's going to be a fair amount of dollars taken off the top to cover all the administrivia costs from the Auditor General's office throughout. Is there any estimate as to what that's going to run out of that $827 million?
I haven't seen any. That's a good point, though, Cliff, that yes, those estimates that I'm putting up there are probably a little high, because before anything gets put into the 5 buckets, there is money that's taken out for the Auditor General, for the department, for the State Board for administration of this program.
I believe that JLBC estimated it was $37,000.
37,000. Yeah, I probably ignore that because I don't see that as being a huge additional cost. And so I wouldn't estimate that out of that 827 million that you'd be seeing a lot of, not even 1% or a tenth of 1% would be taken up by those costs. So, but thanks for bringing that up, Cliff.
Excuse me, Sean. I'm sorry, Sean. We don't have I can't find the chat button. Has it been disabled? I don't have one either.
I'll do some work on that. I don't see one either. I'll have to play around with it. Sorry about it.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, Jackie.
Sean, this is Jackie Price.
Hi, Jackie.
Hello. So my concern with this is that the buckets are very restrictive, and I have 5 districts out of my 6 that only one of those districts would see enough money to hire a new teacher. And so I think that that's my big problem with this bill, is that they put so many restrictions on it for our small rural school districts.
And thank you for bringing that up, Jackie. I think there are definitely a lot of things that draw people to feel strongly in support of this. There are also a lot of the elements in this proposal that cause people to have concerns about it. And so, I think that provides us with an excellent segue to kind of go ahead, and we'll turn it over to Joe. I know he's got some slides he's going to share. Like I said, Joe Thomas he's the president of the Arizona Educators Association, and has been very involved in this too. So go ahead, Joe. We'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Sean. And I did have some slides, but they were really more or less what Sean shared. So I'll save you all from one more PowerPoint today. Good afternoon, or good morning, everybody. I'm sorry. My name is Joe Thomas. I'm a social studies teacher out of Mesa, and I currently serve as president of the Arizona Education Association. I originally moved to Arizona from Oklahoma. I grew up in East Ninnekah, Oklahoma, population 1,000 on a good day or a good year. A farming community where we didn't have a football team. We weren't big enough for it. We played fall baseball where we could almost always go to state. And then in spring baseball, when all the other schools played, we summarily were trounced. But I grew up with very small, we were 2A classification in Oklahoma. My class was huge. I graduated with 52 students in the entire senior class. It was bigger than any other class in the entire district. I think we had about 500 kids. And then I moved to Arizona and I began working in Mesa, which had at the time 72,000 students. So it was kind of a culture shock for me. I do not pretend to know what it is like to be a superintendent in a rural district, but I still keep up with Superintendent Craig on Facebook, which is something I never thought I would be doing, but he's given me a lot of advice around how to approach different things. He is not a superintendent at this point. But he also was the business manager, and he was the grant writer, and he was the curriculum director. I mean, that's how big we were, is 3 schools. The junior high had an administrator that was Mr. Hopper, the social studies teacher, who was a teacher on assignment. And I was a kid, I didn't know what that meant. I know that now, but for 1 hour a day, he was the site administrator. What we're trying to do with Invest in Ed is actually match the rhetoric that we've heard for years and years and years from politicians and everybody else, saying that they're going to support schools, they're going to give you the resources to do what you need to do, which is, regardless of the size of your town, provide your families and particularly your students quality public education. In Ninnekah, we didn't have physics. We didn't have foreign language. We had German by satellite. You guys remember those big 9-foot satellite dishes? This was back in the 80s. We had German by satellite. In Alec, Oklahoma, they had a teacher that could teach German, and all of the rest of us had a little phone that still had the long curly cord on it, and we had a question we had to call the teacher, and it worked for, you know, as much as it could. So I can appreciate the corners that you all have to not really cut, but the creativity that you all have to provide as quality an education as you can. Invest in Ed is not going to solve every one of our problems, but it does bring in additional funding, and a significant amount, even if it's the reduced numbers that that you saw on the slides back from what we saw when we first wrote this. If it's only $600 per student, do that math on a sheet of paper in front of you right now. What could you do with $600 additional per student? The voters do want us to have some buckets around that money. They do believe that the #1 issue right now is that we don't have enough teachers in all of our classrooms. I don't think anybody knows that better than you do. And the difficulty it is to hire and retain quality personnel in all of our communities. This is an important step towards being able to do that. If there are smaller issues that are still important, that can be worked out legislatively after this passes. But there is no plan B. You're going to hear some critiques on Invest in Ed today by people that actually have been targeting you. And I don't know what that feels like, but they've not come out against the measure. The attack ads are against superintendents making $250,000 a year, which undermines all the good work that you all have been doing in your community. As you go out and you have to reach into your community, as they did in Ninnekah, we called them levies in Oklahoma. You have to reach out and raise additional property taxes from oftentimes communities that are fatigued, that can't raise those resources all the time. And you have to build good community rapport. And then when these commercials come out, and there'll be mailings that'll come out as well during this campaign that will say that you are wasteful spenders and that they give too much money to administrators. And if we just rerouted that money, you'd have all the money you need. And you know that's not true. You know that's not true. We need additional funding into the formula. Every meeting that any governor has put together has indicated that, and Invest in Ed does it. It brings in what we, from the Arizona Department of Revenue, told us, $940 million. Now the economy is going to change, and that number is going to be different a little bit every year. There's no reason to think that we're not going to have a great economy in Arizona to where you're going to be seeing $700 per student. You're going to be able to hire the people that you need. You're going to be able to not have to decide, am I going to fix the air conditioner, or am I going to have enough money to hire a kindergarten teacher? Or am I going to be able to repair the roof, or am I going to fix the bus? And those are real stories that come out of our classrooms right now. And there's been 2 years since the first time we tried to do something like this. When the Supreme Court kicked us off the ballot, it's an old story. We can talk about it at a later time. But for 2 years, nothing has come out of the legislature to address the issues that you need. They've brought back a little bit of dollars towards district additional assistance. And then before the governor even signed district additional assistance, he said you can use that to pay your people. That's not what DAA was set up for. You all are working in a stressed system, an overcrowded, underfunded system, and Invest in Ed is going to bring you some dollars to help you do what it is that you were hired to do, and that's to provide a great public school for that community. It's to hire the quality people that you need. And when people get paid a little bit more and you can compete with the valley or the surrounding states, they're going to take that paycheck and they're going to spend it right back into your community. East Ninnekah had one 7-Eleven, except it, they didn't have enough money to actually call it a 7-Eleven because they'd had to pay for a franchise. We had one grocery store. That's how small the town was. You all may be in a small town like that. You may be in a little bit bigger town, but this investment is going to go right back into your community. You're going to be able to hire people. You're going to be able to retain people. You're going to be able to put the quality school opportunities that your students deserve. And we're going to end the teacher crisis, or at least take a big bite out of it. So Invest in Ed is total upside. All of the critiques that I've seen are dubious in their calculations. The one thing I will leave you with is this is a surcharge on income. You're going to hear a lot of talk about small businesses, and I'll let the tax people settle that one out. It would be illegal for any of this money to tax a small business. It is a tax on income, and it's only on income earned over $250,000 or over $500,000. That's going to bring in almost $1 billion of new money to invest in every single one of our districts. Because it shouldn't matter where a kid lives. It shouldn't matter what zip code they call home. Everybody ought to be able to send their kid on that big yellow school bus to a great public school, and Invest in Ed gets us closer to that. Thanks, Sean. Thank you, Melissa.
Sean, you're muted.
Hate it when that happens, man. All right, thank you, Joe, for that perspective. Now we're going to turn it over to Chad Heinrich. I'll let him introduce himself for just a moment and then share with us a little bit of a different perspective on what Proposition 208 will do. So, thank you for joining us, Chad.
Sure. Thank you, Sean, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for hosting this discussion on Prop 208. As Sean mentioned, my name is Chad Heinrich, and I represent the National Federation of Independent Business, and I'm the Arizona State Director. NFIB is the largest business advocacy group by membership in Arizona. We represent roughly 5,000 small business owners across the state, and our membership is split about half and half. We have about half of our members in metropolitan areas, but a strong half are from rural Arizona. And these businesses are mostly family owned and operated. Our members in Arizona, just on average, ballpark, have anywhere between 5 and 10 employees. So I'm also a small business owner myself, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share some of the hidden consequences we see with Prop 208. I have to follow Joe. As you may have caught in my bio, I actually started my career in South Dakota. I grew up in Tripp, and I am a student of Tripp Delmont Public School. Graduated with 26 other classmates. And when I was in Tripp, there was about 800 residents, and I'm going to ballpark it at maybe about 600 now. But started my career in South Dakota more than 20 years ago now, and we're obviously in rural areas and in rural states. We're dealing with a lot of the same issues today as I dealt with as I started my career in South Dakota. As leaders of your schools in rural Arizona, you know that you have the different unique issues that metro areas don't. How do you maintain stable funding when faced with declining enrollment? I know that's an issue that I've seen through both states and in several around the country. And other issues that drive down funding that you receive from year to year, risking what are essential items in your budget. And I'm sure you have a lot of other issues that come to mind. What I'm here to impress upon you is that Prop 208 is not the cure-all that the proponents are asking you to believe. And I know Joe doesn't represent it as a cure-all, but in many cases, it puts at risk the stable funding that you've been seeing grow steadily for the past 5 years. I've labeled this initiative the Small Business Destruction Act of 2020, because that's what it is. You all have felt the effects and costs of COVID-19 on your school budgets and seen the impact on local small businesses and employers in town. Like you, many small businesses are also faced with adapting to an entirely new set of business standards and a different business environment. It should be self-evident that this is the wrong time to be increasing taxes on small business owners. For over 40 years, NFIB has continually asked our members for current information on their business through research and surveys. Just last month, our surveys found that roughly half of small business owners expect to need additional financial assistance simply to keep their business afloat through the pandemic. Now, we don't have exact numbers on how many businesses have closed, but I did see some recent Yelp data shows 60% of business closures due to the coronavirus are now permanent. This proposition is seeking to layer on additional taxes for those small business owners that are actually just able to stay afloat while we continue the recovery. This is clearly the wrong time to be raising taxes on small business and placing these additional costs and pressure on these local entrepreneurs right while they're trying to keep their doors open. So I'm sure several of your large taxpayers in your school districts are involved in agriculture. These are probably the largest taxpayers in your school district, and these are also small business owners. I grew up in the ag economy and started life as the son of a cattle rancher. So I know that farm revenue can have one good year followed by what can be several bad years, followed by maybe another good year, and the roller coaster continues. So when you're running an ag operation, you count heavily on the good years to carry you through what could be more than one or two bad years in a row. We all know that it was the hottest summer on record in Arizona, and many farmers were already struggling with crops to support their livestock and having good yielding loads to sell at market. So now we're hearing the proponents of Prop 208 asking you to increase the taxes on your local ranchers and farmers. This would be an 80% increase on the tax rate they pay in the good years, on the revenue that they're earning in the good years. This will effectively remove profit that helps them survive the down years. One can imagine how this will impact the psyche of a rancher or a farmer or any small business owner. As a consequence, they'll be less likely to invest in their business. They'll be less likely to hire new employees and maintain their current payroll. They'll be less likely to purchase capital goods like farm equipment or build new buildings. And all of these activities currently drive more tax revenue into your tax base. So in lockstep, this tax will stifle and choke small business owners, the ranchers, the farmers, the ag sector in your community, while it offers you very inconsistent and unstable sources of dollars. So we've heard from leading Arizona economists that they agree this proposition will destroy Arizona's economy. In fact, it's been reported that in the first 10 years, we will see 124,000 jobs lost in our state and a significant reduction of $2.4 billion in state and local tax revenues. This means the general fund will be negatively affected and will make it harder for your districts to see future increases in or a sustainability of a current base within the K-12 funding formula. There's a reason that responsible Arizona K-12 groups are keeping wide social distance from this initiative. The proposal will destabilize education funding that we have spent 5 years investing in and stands to provide inconsistent funds at its best. Studies of the revenue from this top tax bracket show that revenue can go up or down 30% year to year. It's very unpredictable and unreliable, which you all will feel during budget season. You won't be able to rely on any money from this new tax for base salary increases for teachers. The very best that teachers could expect is a 5% bonus in good years and $0 in down years. Overall, this will provide less dollars for teachers than the recently completed 20 by 2020 plan. The Legislative Budget Office, the JLBC, put data out that shows 4 out of 7 years after the Great Recession were negative years in this tax bracket. That's 4 of 7 years negative during a growing economy. What will happen to this funding when the economy is in decline? The revenue will disappear on top of the hit you're already going to feel from the impact to the general fund and per pupil funding. Education funding has increased at a faster rate between FY 2015 and FY 21 than at any other time in Arizona in the last 20 years. This is an unreliable funding source and stands to directly harm your neighbors, your local employers, your farmers, and families, with greater consequences for your local community than I think we have as benefits. So I would ask you as individuals to vote no on Prop 208. Again, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this. I appreciate it and look forward to the future discussion.
Thank you, Chad. That as anticipated, a very different perspective. When you look at this through the lens of the small business, there are lots of reasons to have concerns, and we appreciate you sharing that perspective with us. Our next presenter, our next panelist is David Lujan, again, I hope you got a chance to review his bio. If you're not familiar with David and his work, he's been actively involved in advocating for funding for education and for making Arizona's public education system better and stronger for many years, and has been very involved with the engineering of this proposal. And so we're glad to have him join us. I'll turn it over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Hi, everyone. So as rural school administrators, you know that oftentimes your school districts are among the largest employers in your small communities. And you also know and have been faced with all the funding cuts that we have seen in Arizona over the past 20 years. You've had to struggle with letting people go, eliminating positions, not being able to give wage increases when you wanted to. So when Proposition 208 passes, think about when Arizona has an additional $940 million a year in new revenue. And by the way, that revenue, that estimate comes from the Arizona Department of Revenue. When school districts suddenly have millions of new dollars to be able to increase the wages of the employees that you've not been able to increase the wages of, to rehire and fill positions that you haven't been able to fill the positions of, that's a lot of people in small communities that are suddenly going to have more money in their pockets to go out and buy things in the local small businesses, to eat out, to grow the economies of small towns all over Arizona. And that is why we say Proposition 208 is great, particularly for rural communities and rural small businesses. It's great for Arizona economy in general. But also the other thing I think to really think about is the career and technical education component of Prop 208, with an estimated $940 million, or even the estimate that Sean gave you, whichever one you take, career and technical education funding, state funding for those programs will more than double. Current funding at those levels is about $80 million. And right now it's at about a high point than what it's been in the last few years. Career and technical education funding in Arizona will more than double with Proposition 208. And I know in rural communities, that's particularly important for building your workforce, for giving students the skills that they will need to fill those critical jobs. So we're particularly excited about that. Let me just address some of the things that Chad mentioned. First of all, it is mathematically impossible for anyone to see an 80% tax increase or doubling of their taxes. We hear a lot about how Arizona's taxes are going to be among the highest in the country, and that is simply not true. I'll give you one example. A married couple that has $650,000 in taxable income in Arizona with Proposition 208 will still pay less state income taxes in Arizona than in 34 other states. That is not one of the highest tax rates in the country. And in fact, the top 1% who are impacted by this, they will still pay a lower effective tax rate than the national average and then in the majority of other states. as you've heard, this only taxes the top 1% of wealthiest Arizonans. We've heard the comments about small businesses. Again, the threshold for this is $500,000 of taxable income or above if you're a married couple, or $250,000 or above if you're a single filer. Proposition 208 will not tax a single business. That's legally impossible. This only taxes individuals. Now, it's true there are individuals who get some of their income from businesses, but the average income for small business owners in Arizona, according to the Small Business Administration, is $48,000 a year. So when you hear about Chad talking about how this is going to have an impact on those struggling small businesses and how they're struggling to keep their doors open and food on the table, if they're struggling, they're not going to be impacted by Proposition 208. If they are making taxable income that they are claiming on their individual personal income taxes of $500,000 or more a year in taxable income, then yes, they will be impacted because they are fortunate enough to be in the 1% of the wealthiest Arizonans. Those are not your struggling small businesses. Those are not your families struggling to put food on the table. And I would venture to say that most of your population in rural Arizona are not in that 1% of the wealthiest Arizonans. We heard a lot about the stable funding and whether this is going to give you stable funding as a school district. And you know better than anyone, this is the instability that we have had in school district budgets over the years. We have a district additional assistant budget that's supposed to fund you at what, $370 million a year? Can you count on that $370 million every year? Many years over the past decade, the state has given you zero. Some years they've given you 20% or 50%. What about building renewal? That used to fund you at about $280 million a year. Can you count on that money every year? Many years the legislature has given you zero. Sometimes they give you grants of like $10 million a year. This Proposition 208 will provide you with more certainty in your budgets than you've had in 20 years. The one reason why that is because the politicians at the state capitol cannot touch this money. It goes into a separate fund that goes directly to you that the legislature cannot touch. The reason that we have seen so much instability in our budgets over the years for school districts is because the legislature has been taking that money. Proposition 208 taxes the top 1%. That is, all tax revenues are a little bit volatile. And so proposition, the wealthiest and the 1%, that can be a little bit volatile, just like all the other tax sources. But what we're seeing in this particular economic crisis is that the wealthiest 1%, that income level is actually more stable than the other income levels at this point. So in some years, it might go down a little bit. In other years, it's going to go up. But you're going to have that consistent revenue that you can count on from year to year because the legislature is not going to be able to get their hands on it. The other argument you hear from our opponents is that somehow businesses are going to leave and they're going to flee. A lot of their studies have been based on a Stanford University study that is one of the leading studies in the country about millionaire migration and tax rates. The author of that study, the Stanford University professor, he actually got a hold of those studies that our opponents have been doing over this past weekend. And he said it is completely false the way that they did their calculations. They completely misunderstood the reports. He said that Arizona's millionaire population, he looked at Proposition 208, did his calculations, and said that our millionaire population in Arizona can be expected to grow in the future years. And why is that? You all know why. All the research out there, whether they're state economists or national economists, will tell you one of the most important things you can do to grow your economy in Arizona is to invest in your public education system, to invest in your future workforce. And that's what all of our neighboring states have been doing in recent years. And that's what a lot of states around the country have been doing, more so than Arizona. And we've been falling further and further behind the national average. And think about all the students who have gone through our education system over the last 20 years because of our underfunded education system. And think about the economic crisis that we already have today because of 20 years of underfunding our public education system. And this is why 208 is so necessary, because nobody else is coming up with a plan to do this. And so finally, the people of Arizona have an opportunity to vote and end our funding crisis and deal with the issues that we've been dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you for that perspective. You know, it is. I mean, Arizona has definitely developed an education funding issue. You know, you look at, I love, what's his name? Bruce. I want to say Bruce Babbitt, but I'm not sure. Anyway, he's done a lot of studies on education funding in America. And whenever he graphs out the effort versus spending on education, it's always easy to find Arizona because we're usually in the bottom left-hand quadrant. And there is an issue there. And Proposition 208, was crafted to address that issue. And in some ways, would move the needle and would move us out of that lower left-hand quadrant. But our last speaker, Jim Swanson, has been actively involved in Arizona's efforts to develop a solution over the last few decades. He has a lot of experience with this, and when he's not busy doing a million other things, if you had a chance to look at his bio, you'll see that quite the list of people looking for his attention and his input. And we're really, really glad to have him join us today to share his perspective on this issue. So I'll just turn it over to Jim.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa and Sean, for asking me. And David and Joe and Chad, thank you for your perspectives on this. I have the great pleasure of running a 100% employee-owned contracting company that's been in Arizona for 70 years. We have a little over 1,000 employees. When I'm not doing that, I spend a lot of time advocating for education. I chair the Education Committee for Greater Phoenix Leadership. I chair the Teach for America Arizona Board, and I also sit on the State Charter Board and spend a lot of time. And I also co-chaired with Governor Ducey his Classrooms First initiative, which in many ways we've ticked away at many of the recommendations we came up with during that time period. I'd like to start today by saying I hope you hear some things that you didn't expect from me. First, I want to congratulate Mr. Thomas and Mr. Lujan for getting this on the ballot, for showing the courage to go out there and fight and kind of get the people that are engaged and care about our education system to do something. I'm glad it's on the ballot. I think this deserves to be heard. So I give you guys a lot of credit for that. Also, I hope you understand, I also don't think this is enough money. I think we need to do something bigger. I think the number is $1.5 billion minimum. Now, that we'll talk a little bit how I think we can do that as well. Also, if 208 passes, I will never turn my back on public education in Arizona. We'll have a lot of work to do. I think it'll be harder in many respects, but if it does pass, I will be there hand in hand with everyone that wants to continue to reform and make education better in Arizona. And then lastly, I just want to say that we, the business community, failed miserably. We let the Arizona education community down when 208, the version of 208 got kicked off the ballot 2 years ago. I stood in front of a lot of business leaders and said, this isn't going to go away. Let's come up with something better. We didn't like it then. Many business people don't like it today. Defining who the business community was and all those other things, but I think we failed. And so congratulations to you guys for getting this on the ballot. The reason that this isn't right, and I hope and pray if this doesn't pass, okay, that we can all come together and build a coalition to come up with what I would think would be a better plan, better strategy. And I know the education system is in dire need of funding. And so, but if this does not pass, I hope we can do that. And I'd also like to say something to a comment that Joe made. I don't particularly like the way the No campaign is being run. I think it makes it harder if this does get defeated, for us to go forward, because it is sort of misconstruing the administrative cost and burdens in the system. So I agree with that. But I'm going to give you two different perspectives. My business perspective first, and then I'll give you my education advocate. One, and this got touched on, this is the wrong revenue stream. It is, we're picking a small sliver of one revenue stream, and that sliver will be the most volatile, least predictable stream. If you look at California, what happened in 2008, and with what happened to their income, the state revenue, because they're so dependent on high earners, it tanked. They're looking at a $55 billion deficit. It's like 5 times the Arizona budget this year because of COVID and what's happening to their economy. I do believe it's bad for economic development in the state. I'm not sure, like David touched on, I'm not sure if I buy that people are going to flee Arizona. Some may, few may, but I don't know if I buy that, because people are invested here. Their businesses are here, they're stuck here. Not that this is a bad place to be stuck. I've been here for 25 years. This is my forever home. But I do believe that states like Texas and Nevada start to look more attractive than in Arizona for a business that wants to move or expand or grow. And that is economic development. That's the kinds of things. I'm involved with Greater Phoenix Economic Council. I sit on their board. Those are the kinds of things that we are looking at as being harmful to the state if we go forward with this. So I think there's some truth in that. The other thing is that I haven't heard a lot of people talking about is this is not inflation indexed. Like the Arizona, I think our income tax is inflation indexed. So at some point over years and years and a decade, more and more people will creep into this tax surcharge. As an education advocate, like I said before, it's not enough. I think the number is more like $1.5 billion. And the solution largely ignores the P20 ecosystem, which includes university help that is desperately needed in our system and that the business communities have supported for so long. I fear that the wind will come out of the sails if this gets passed, and that we're going to have a hard time doing anything else. Unlike what I said, that I'll never turn my back on education, I think a lot of people will say, the box is checked, let's move on. I hope we don't do that, but I think it's a real possibility. And then it doesn't do really anything to reform our funding formula. And people that have been in it know it's archaic. It doesn't address equity issues that are out there. It doesn't address poverty as the key driver of the achievement gap. It puts $1 in a Paradise Valley School student's pocket just like it would on the Navajo Reservation in Yuma or in Maryvale. Same dollar. Which I actually don't think is right. I'd like to do that. And then there's a whole bunch of other things. It doesn't touch vouchers or tax credits or the drain on the general fund that I think is going to be caused by the explosive growth in the state charter and state charters. I sit on the state charter board, and I'm looking at that very carefully because I think that that is a huge issue as we go forward and so forth. So, and I think that the ultimate solution, and this will be a very small asterisk, I think the public education system, I think everybody has to have some skin in the game. I'm not saying that the wealthy shouldn't pay more or a lot more, but I think everybody has to be invested in the system. It's incredibly important. So the solution, I think, needs to be broad-based to give you a more stable, predictable economics or revenue stream. In this state, we need to touch the third rail of revenue. Somebody needs to step up and say that we need to reform our property tax system and more broadly fund our school systems through the state rather than depending on bonds and overrides to make this happen. It has to happen and is really important to the ultimate solution, making Arizona a great place for education. We probably need to touch sales tax a little bit, and I'm happy to touch income tax as well. But I think when we worked with the most stable streams of revenue to help a predictable system is if we can possibly reform taxes or property taxes and do a slight modification to the sales tax. So with that, I am a huge supporter of education. I am sickened about the lack of resources that we have giving to our kids in our schools, and we need to change this. I'm just not sure this is the right thing right now. But I'm always here to help. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for your time. You know, that's again, as you said, I think that there are some things said there that people probably didn't expect. You know, but a great deal of knowledge and some wisdom, I think. So our next, hold on one second, Chad.
Sean, I just wanted to follow up on a couple of things that Jim mentioned. I mean, we have evidence of the business community supporting education funding just in the last several years. So I think, as Jim mentioned, you know, we are willing to work with the education community on these issues. When you think back to the recession, we supported the temporary one cent sales tax. We supported the 20 by 2020 plan, and of course, we supported the settlement in Prop 123. So you know, there's evidence there. And then, if I could just correct one thing that David talked about, this not hitting small businesses. And I just came from my in-laws' farm in South Dakota. They farm about 3,000 acres there, and it is a small business in my father-in-law's name. So it is flowing through his personal tax return. And the way they think about investing in their business is not in a one-year silo. So if they have large capital purchases, they use the income that they may have had in a good year and move forward and potentially take 1 to 2 to 3 years to buy that equipment. So when you're increasing the tax in those good years, you are taking away money that will be used for a capital purchase. Those are a couple of points just wanted to follow up for before we continue. I appreciate the time.
Sure.
Sean, are we all going to get follow-ups?
Well, give me a second. Give me a second. You know, because clearly there's a lot of passion on this, and there are too. You know, there's reasons to vote for it, and there's reasons to vote against it. And our goal here is to see, you know, and to help our you know, rural superintendents to understand, you know, the reasons for and the reasons against, so that
so the answer is no. Okay, thanks.
And support their leaders, you know. But and so our goal now is to kind of turn it over to them to be able to ask some questions. As Jackie pointed out, we don't have a chat box, but what we do have is in the participants window. If you open that window up, you have the opportunity to raise your hand, and Melissa can kind of monitor who's raised their hands and when. We'll try to be fair in terms of, you know, first come, first serve. But I just want to put that out there. Now, I've been watching, you know, the wonderful thing about a Zoom meeting is you can watch people's faces while other people are talking. And I can tell that Joe has developed a list of things he wants to say in response to just about everything that anybody's said about this so far. And I do want to give you, Joe, I want to give you that opportunity to kind of share some of your thoughts that you've, you know, in response to other things that have been said, you know, while people are kind of coming up with their questions. So we'll give you a minute, Joe, if that's
okay. All right. Sean, I appreciate that. I just wanted to agree with Jim in everything that he said about what the other opportunities are. And the difficulty is that everything that he described, from reforming the funding mechanism to going to a sales tax to talking about a property tax, that you need a legislature for that. And you need a governor that doesn't say there will be no new taxes. And we don't have that. We don't have either one of those. So I'm in it for the long game. I'll work with Mr. Swanson. I'll work with NFIB, with anyone, if we're looking at having adult conversations around how we can bring resources in. What we do have now is what Mr. Swanson congratulated us for. We have 435,000 voters that put their name on a petition. We wrote it. It's constitutionally accurate and legal, and it is in front of us to do something now and not have to wait 2 more years for an election, or not have to wait until we have the right legislature or the right governor. But those long-term goals he talked about, I'm 100% support of. I think we need to invest in ed and continue to look for how do we create a world-class P20 education system in the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And that's, you know, in over the last couple of years, 3-4 years, I think, since you know, ARSA really started getting into the advocacy game. I remember sitting down with Don German when he was the executive director at the end of a legislative session. We said, we know what the problem is, and every superintendent on this call knows what the problem is, and that is that at the end of every year, as you're trying to develop the next year's budget, you've probably got, anywhere from $250,000 to, $3 million worth of needs going forward, things that people have come to you with and said, gosh, whether that's we need a white fleet vehicle, or we need an AC unit, or, we need another speech language interventionist. We need an extra teacher so we can reduce class sizes. There's all these wants. And then you look at what your budget's going to be for the next year, and you realize, okay, I've got enough revenue to cover some, maybe, and if you're in a declining district, none of those new wants, unless you're willing to make cuts in other areas. I referred to that in a conversation I had last spring as, trying to squeeze blood out of a turnip. Creating a public school budget is just that every year. And so, Don and I, when we were talking about this, I said, well, how can ARSA try to take a role? We said, well, we're going to become source agnostic, and we're going to be looking for any opportunity to advocate for additional revenue for public schools. And that drew us into, support for the sales tax increase that was brought forward by Mr. Francis and Ballantyne and Whitehead. And I know that Jim Swanson was involved in that a little bit as well, and so ARSA, which is interesting because it kind of goes back to Joe's comment. ARSA tried to work with people in the legislature, tried to work with people on the ninth floor to say, okay, how can we craft a proposal? How can we move a proposal forward that can then gather support? Even to the extent of going as far as saying, okay, what were the 7 priorities that the governor identified in his State of the State address when he talked about education? Those are the things we're going to base a sales tax proposal on. And still, there was no support for that proposal coming out of the state's politically, the elected leadership in the state, and that really has created a deficit, a gap, where other things have had to try to come up with solutions. We saw Helios try to develop some solutions. They put some things out there, maybe a little bit prematurely for their own design timetable, and then kind of pulled them back because they realized that there was, again, little or no leadership support for it. So this proposal is on the table, largely because it's it's what's out there, and with all of its weaknesses, we're faced with the question of if not this, then what else? And I really urge people to take Jim's approach. Yeah, this will in all likelihood pass, and then from there we're still going to have to deal with addressing issues. Go ahead, Joe. I see your hand up there.
Yeah, I just had a question for the superintendents. I graduated in 1987 out of rural Oklahoma, and we had the equivalent of a JTED that you got on a bus and you went to 15 minutes away. But I know not every rural school district has that opportunity. Arizona is just a bigger state and it's set up differently. So I'm curious about the ability in Invest in Ed to allow districts or CTEDs, I think they're called now, to pursue 5-year grants for funding for, among other things, career and technical education jobs. And as my understanding, and I was in on the writing of it, it does allow you to either hire the position to teach it. And David, you give me a shake of the head no if I say something wrong. It allows you to hire the position to teach it, but it also would provide the funding to set up the program if you needed to buy the tools or buy the machinery to have the program at your school site. It does not allow you to supplant unless you have a grant that's running out. But I just wondered if there was value, the way I remember it in 1987 or 84 through 87 in high school. We had baseball, we had basketball, we had ag, and we had Canadian County BOTAC, which is what it was called. I just wondered if there's still a value around the CTE programs.
Jerry Jennings, I see that your hand is up. Please.
Thank you, Melissa, Sean. Thank you, gentlemen, for your willingness to come and share your perspective. Chad, I spent 3 years in Huron, South Dakota, so I know about South Dakota. Great place to be. I'm an old guy. I'm a rural superintendent for my career. This is year 27. First in Montana, then in Michigan for 16 years, and now 9 years in Arizona. And the people here know that I'm not shy. So first of all, Joe, yes, anything we can do to grow jobs, to grow things that our kids can do, we're all about. We're about college prep. I do big things on dual enrollment. So the big statement and question I guess I have, not a question, well, it is a question. I like the way Sean said it. This is now, and we're going to answer the question now. Chad, I get where you're coming from. We need reform. Jim, I get that we need reform. How long is it going to take to reform the funding system? I've been in Montana, Michigan, and now Arizona as a superintendent. Montana, struggled with funding rural. Chad knows what it's like in those rural states, but man, there's a great work ethic and people get by on next to nothing, and the teachers work for next to nothing, and people survive. Great communities, but they're small. Michigan, where I was for 16 years, invested in education. They taxed it in property tax. They absolutely taxed it in property tax. Strong union, Joe. Teachers made a livable wage. My teachers in rural Michigan were able to live on their salary. They were able to have full health insurance for their families. So is there a will any place to get Arizona off the bottom? That's my question. Sean says until we exceed the national average in increases every year, we continue to suck air at the back of the pack. So is there a will in Arizona to get off the bottom? That's the biggest question.
And
Do you want to respond?
interesting.
Hey, can I just real quickly?
Yes.
Just said, I think that, that is the question. And Joe, you said, I think that having seen what's going on now, I have seen a shift, and I believe it, in the business community of saying, okay, we get it now, we're awakened. It's going to be hard, but I think that there will be a demand to do something if this does not pass. I think there is that will out there to do it, and I'll keep fighting.
And I would just follow up on Jim's comments as well. From the business community perspective and from my perspective within FIB, I think Jim and I would definitely be hand in hand wanting to work with the education community on our property tax system. We absolutely need a more equitable property tax system that enables everyone to have a stake in the game. And so I think that would be one place we're absolutely willing to work together. And I think that's the strength that we would have, is working together with the education community. And with that work, we can overcome what David and Joe have experienced as far as legislative resistance to funding choices. But it has to come with some reforms as well.
So I just to get in 30 seconds on that, I'll leave it to David to talk about. I mean, we looked at property tax, and Arizona's they're not ready for that discussion at all. It's atrocious, the reaction to a property tax. I am done having the 5th grade teacher showing up to 37 kids every morning being the most courageous person in education in the state. So I'm in with the superintendent that spoke earlier, and I think that's what we've been doing. I think that Red for Ed, I mean, regardless of how it happened, It was 8 weeks of mobilization to get something done, and it had some success. And educators know that that works. We're trying to do something by the ballot, and we do have an opportunity in front of us. And I think it's too big of an opportunity to pass up. And it's not going to be the last thing we're going to do for schools. It'll have some legislative fixes on it afterwards in the areas that we can. But we have to do something about the problem that every name that I'm looking at right now on the screen knows better than I ever will. It is impossible to attract and retain a full component of teachers in our schools right now, much less transportation, much less the other professions that serve us. And what will help with that a little bit in the short run, in the now, is having additional funding to where you can attract and retain top talent from our own universities to stay in this state and teach and give back to the system that helped them get where they are. David, do you want to talk about property taxes real quick, or anything else that we looked at?
I would say we looked at all types of revenue sources, and there's a lot of different options in raising revenue for education. And it's good to hear Jim and Chad talk about property tax. I agree. I think that's a really good, viable solution. But the fact is, we had some conversations with members of the business community 2 years ago about property tax, and there was a lot of pushback from the business community about property tax. And if you raise the sales tax, there's a lot of pushback from certain segments of the business community on sales tax. So that's, I think, always been the impediment, is trying to get consensus in the business community, and there hasn't been. And so Prop 208 exists.
Yeah, well, we're happy to talk about the property tax with NFIB and the assessment ratio there anytime. The one real issue I think that we haven't fleshed out is the inconsistency in the revenue that would come from what's proposed. You're not going to be able to hire teachers on this revenue source with a 30% swing from year to year. You won't be able to expect the revenue that you can right now through the steady and consistent sources that we have. And I would also say that, when you're thinking about how to explain this to your board members, just realize that in many cases, that top income tax bracket will be paying more per dollar of tax than corporations that are the largest corporations in the state. So I think you're going to get some pushback from your board members when they're looking at their constituents, who the board member may be a farmer, a rancher, or a small business owner, and of course we'll have a lot of constituents in that category. So it's been estimated that this will hit roughly 50,000 businesses that are filed as pass-through entities in Arizona, and those are, for the most part, those are the small businesses in Arizona.
Well, Chad raises a point about the revenue coming in, and what it's designed to do is a little bit similar to how Prop 301 comes in. It asks for 2 disbursements 6 months apart, and what we envision is, in the same way that districts are told what 301 money should look like and then will look like, that there can be estimates that can be brought in on this. There is turnover that happens at the end of every school year. That's scalable depending on the size of your district, certainly, to where they'll be able to capture some of the loss or some of the actual increases that we're looking at. But it is hard to hear an argument saying that more money is coming in, but you're not going to be able to use it for the things that you need to do. I can appreciate what Chad's talking about. There is going to be a small adjustment, but it's no different than any of the other adjustments that we've had to make when we had Indian gaming money come in, when we had 301 money come in, back when some districts had career ladder funding that came in. I do believe in the creativity of our educators, and I'm including certainly superintendents in that, to be able to see this new resource and allocate it appropriately, to where it will end up doing the intended job of helping you all keep your doors open and provide a better education for your students.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, David. Appreciate your time, Joe. This has been really, really great. I see Alan Rogers has his hand up, and so we'll take one last question. We're flexible as far as our end time, but So
I'll just make it real quick. First of all, I appreciate everybody being there. The perspectives on both sides, it was informative for me. I'm a small, very small district superintendent in Pinell County, and I'm also married to a small district superintendent in Pinell County. Both of us are, we work hard every day, but even our combined income is not anywhere near what they say the average superintendent salary is. So um, I just wanted to state, we've got people working hard every day, not just during this COVID, but every day. And anything we can do to help them is much appreciated. It just seems like we're fighting an uphill battle all the time. But anyway, I just wanted to state the average salaries for superintendents that I'm aware of aren't anywhere near what we're hearing stated in some of the anti-sentiments for this thing. So not even close. So anyway, I appreciate everybody's perspective, and thanks for hosting this. It's been very informative for me.
thank you, Alan. Thank you. It's interesting. I'm glad we had the opportunity to do this. The quote that comes to mind is, politics is the art of the possible. And we're in a political system right now, which in many ways has become broken. And I think Jim really spoke to that a little bit. I know, that's the issue. We talk about, well, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we could? We've been trying to figure out a way to put in, everything from excise tax reform to property tax reform to sales tax reform to generate additional revenue for education. And we haven't been able to get that done. And what we have here is we have a proposal, and I'll throw Tim Carter's comments on the table just because he did put them in a piece that appeared up in the local paper up there in the Prescott area. And he was invited to be a panelist, but couldn't make it because he's out there helping people understand the consolidation issues going on right now in Yavapai County. But his point was, there's something fundamentally wrong with a proposal where basically we take a problem that everybody recognizes is a problem. Everybody agrees is a problem. We need more money to support teacher salaries, to support programs, to support the needs of students in our state. And the only way that we can agree to pay for it is by putting the cost of that need onto 6% of the population. That's what we can do. And what's driving that is that, yes, we have polling that shows that overwhelming, that amazingly, somewhere around in the range of 94% of Arizonans maybe think that's a great idea because it isn't going to cost them a dime and it meets their needs. I mean, there's reason for concern, not about Proposition 208. Proposition 208 has been crafted by people who care deeply about the needs of public schools in Arizona and trying to help us to meet those needs. But I think that our concern should be about the overall political system. And we need to be careful that we don't slough that off into reasons not to support this proposal. We've heard that there are proposals. There are reasons not to support this proposal. And I think those have been well shared. And I would, if there's anything that any of our panelists wanted to add in closing here before we wrap it up, I can see participants are starting to drift away. That usually happens when I start talking. But we'll kind of go in reverse order. Jim, if you had anything that you wanted to say in closing.
So that I'm a proud product of Michigan Public Schools.
Thank you, Jim.
Well funded through property tax.
David?
Just thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Chad?
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity. And just know that we are always available and want to work with you on a solution. But unfortunately, we think that Prop 208 is the wrong tax at the wrong time. And thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you. And finally, Joe.
Jim, was that Big Blue or Spartans? It's a risky question.
Go blue.
There we go. Okay. I live next door to a Spartan, but I don't hold that against me. Yeah, thank you all. Thank you for the work that you do every single day for our students. Chad, I think, came out of rural schools. I did as well. I'm not sure about everybody else in the room, but they're everything. They're absolutely everything to the community. I wasn't kidding when in Ninnekah we had baseball, basketball, and ag. That was it. And once you got into high school, you got to go learn how to do CAD or learn how to become a nurse or automotive. I mean, there were even limited experiences that we had back then. But the public school was everything. And I really do appreciate the work you all do. I know that teachers and administrators don't always agree on everything, but one thing we do agree on is the importance of the public school system. We see 208 as giving you the resources you need to keep the doors open and to offer a little bit more for your students, a little bit more towards what they deserve. And we will continue to work until we can say that every student in the state has a great public school that meets all the needs that they have and that their family has. So thank you all for the opportunity, Sean and Melissa. Thank you all for this. I think it was very productive.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank all of our panelists for taking the time to meet with us today. We really appreciate it. And with that, class is dismissed. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you next month at the next roundtable for ARSA. Thank you all.
Thank you.